Hi, everybody, and thank you again for watching Risk Digital. My name is Claire Maillet, and I'm pleased to guide you through our final theme of the day, which in my view is by far the best. It's financial crime. I would like to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, who you can see listed on the side of the screen here. So I'm also pleased to be moderating this next panel, which is on how to prepare for the Digital Operational Resilience Act, also known as DORA. So I'm going to introduce the panelists onto the screen, and then I will allow them to introduce themselves quickly. So I am joined today by Alina, by Mark, Francesco, and also Bill. So if I could allow each of you to introduce yourselves. Alina, could we start with you, please?
Hello, everyone. I'm Alina Timofeeva. I'm an associate partner at Wyman, a strategy consulting firm, and I tend to focus on digital and on regulation. So essentially not just on the risk and reg side of the regulation, but also how would the teams of the CIO or the more technical teams like engineers, data analysts, work together to meet the regulatory guidelines.
Excellent, thank you very much. Mark, could we come on to you next, please?
Hi, my name is Mark Woolward. I'm CISO and CTO at vArmour. And we have a SaaS platform that automates aspects of operational resilience, particularly in the area of ICT risk management. And my background before vArmour was I was a technology fellow and CTO at Goldman Sachs, where for a couple of years I owned responsibility for what we called application resilience. But actually, if you look at it now, it's ICT risk management.
Excellent, thank you. Francesco, can we go to you next?
Yes, thank you. My name is Francesco Capparelli. I'm a senior fellow researcher for the Italian Institute for Privacy and Quality Information Security Manager of ICTLC, in which I also have the role of Chief Cybersecurity Advisor. We deal with data, all kind of data, say, and information, and all the regulation that relates to data. And therefore, my expertise would be regarding, of course, regulation and from a legal perspective, but even from a technical point of view.
Thank you very much. And Bill, finally. You're on mute, Bill.
Hi, my name's Bill Mew. I'm either a troublemaker or a troubleshooter, depending on where you stand. If your business model is around exploiting people's data, and you possibly have a company beginning with the name F or G, then I'm one of the top privacy campaigners in the UK, and I've helped bring cases and also shortlisted as a privacy champion of the year. But at the same time, that doesn't pay the bills. So I run a crisis management firm, and I'm also, which is focused specifically on cyber crises. But there's a professional organization called IARC, which is the International Association of Risk and Crisis Communications. And I'm the global cyber ambassador, helping to lead best practice and development in how globally we address the cyber challenge.
Excellent, thank you very much. So just to outline what this session is going to speak about. So DORA is a new European framework for effective and all-inclusive management of digital risks in financial markets, with an implementation of 2 years. Financial entities will be expected to be compliant with this by the 17th of January 2025. And so this session will discuss how exactly will DORA affect the financial sector and its professionals, how will it shape the market and impact its sectors, and more importantly, what can you do to prepare for it and the demanding change that comes with it. So Mark, I'll be honest, I hadn't heard of DORA in this sense until about a week ago. So could you kick us off perhaps by explaining the areas of focus specifically?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so DORA has a number of pillars that help an organization to understand how to think about digital risk and how to handle it differently. And if we just step back for a second, this is really driven by the level of digitalization and interconnectedness, which has kind of led to this issue of criticality of digital systems and their complexity. And then alongside that, the value of those systems are that, you know, the financial system relies upon them, so they're very interesting to criminals, so they're more subject to advanced threats. So we've got a challenge here. There's a bunch of things moving around. So what I'd start with is the pillar of the ICT risk management. So I think fundamentally, this is what this is all trying to address, which is to say, how do we make our digital business functions, which in financial services is now everything, how do we make them more resilient? How do we make them more available? And how do we avoid some of the incidents that we've seen over the last few years? So that's pillar number one. And then quickly stepping through the others, you have governance, which is really important because you need to have the correct resources and the right level of leadership associated with it. You have third-party management because organizations have moved to the cloud, are beginning to use all sorts of third-party providers, which adds even more to the complexity. And then we have reporting, testing, and intelligence and data sharing. So they're the pillars that have been broken down, and obviously there's work to do in each of those to deliver a resilient digital financial sector.
Excellent, thank you very much. Bill, anything to add on that?
Those pillars are well known, and you can go and have a look at the regulations as they are set out. My concerns, though, are that if you are simply going to read the regulations and take a sort of tick box approach to this regulation, as many have done to GDPR, it isn't actually going to be of any real benefit to you. There is a massive opportunity, just as there was with GDPR, for organizations to rethink their approach to resilience, just as they rethought their approach to privacy. I would advocate the fact that this needs a holistic approach. It needs to end-to-end a reassessment of processes with resilience in mind, again, just as we had with privacy. But my concern here is that with what we have learned from GDPR is that following a lack of enforcement, far too many organizations have simply taken a tick box approach and have left themselves open to data incidents, which we have seen on numerous occasions. I would hope that DORA is taken more seriously, that organizations are willing to step up to this challenge. But I have some concerns that just there was a limited amount of enforcement around GDPR, that there just aren't the resources in place to enforce DORA. Obviously, I would advocate, I lead a global organization that looks at risks, that gives them very forthright advice on best practice and implementation, not only to organizations, but also to governments. And our concern here is on the organizational side, that people aren't going to take this opportunity to take on board it as a cultural challenge and to rethink the way they do things, to be resilient, but also organizations at a governmental level aren't going to provide the resources to enforce this that's actually going to lead to the right behavior.
So how do we make sure that businesses take this seriously then? Because as you say, it's happened in the past as well. So I think that many of us will often find that it's persuading those who are in more senior roles that may not understand the impact that this is going to have on the operational side as well. So how would you recommend, Bill, that companies sort of make this part of the DNA of their business, as opposed to just seeing it as something that has to be done because regulation says so?
At an organizational level, it needs to be a level of carrot and stick. We need to be able to convey, and I'm a massive champion out there, I do a lot of broadcast media and across social media, the benefits of actually taking this seriously and looking at this as an opportunity to transform your business to be more effective. And resilience is a part of one of the dimensions around being an effective organization. We saw during the global financial crisis that there was far too much orientation simply around ROI factors, return on investment factors, such as revenue and profit, and there wasn't enough of an orientation around risk. And those ROI factors, the return on risk, was something that was ignored. Many of the warnings were ignored, and this was the same not only for the global financial crisis, but for the pandemic and other things. Far too often, the warning lights are ignored. But also, if you're going to have an opportunity to rethink the way you do things, you need to build resilience in from the ground up. And just as we saw with the organizations that made the most from GDPR, these were organizations that made the whole PrivSec orientation a cultural factor within the organization. And therefore, to instill cultural factors that support business resilience are going to be essential to make this effective. And that's the carrot. The stick is going to be, again, I come back to a level of enforcement that some organizations aren't going to budge unless poked, prodded, or even fined.
Sure. Okay. Excellent. So whilst we're on the topics of the legal side of things, Francesco, what's your take from a legal and compliance perspective on this?
There's one thing that Bill just said regarding GDPR. Yes, it's gonna be a revolution, let's say, as GDPR was, but there are points of connections from a legal perspective and a compliance perspective. And let me just put just one point that it's really important in order to be compliant with DORA and GDPR. And the fact is that DORA tries to oblige companies to have a supply chain management and a programmatic monitoring of the supply chain in place. This is something that already GDPR did with Article 28 of the regulation, with a different perspective, let me say. But the fact that DORA and GDPR doesn't give us an obligation in order to assess the adequacy of the supplier, doesn't give us a checklist, a list of security measures that we have to assess, but give us the possibility to actually try to assess the adequacy of the supplier in many different ways. Well, there's the possibility actually to carry out an assessment activity regarding the supplier, making it functional to GDPR compliance and to DORA compliance, because both they are based even on international standards. Even when it's not explicitly quoted, the international standards and the compliance to international standards, it's something that we have to take in consideration, not even for suppliers, but even for our internal compliance. So at the end, and I'll give the floor back to you for the next question, at the end, compliance will mean to be compliant to international standards like ISO 27001, ISO 22301, and assess the compliance to these international standards for the suppliers. And this will bring us to have assessed the compliance both for DORA and for GDPR. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. Alina, let's focus on how this is going to impact businesses on an operational level. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, of course. So there are different practical implementations of the legislation. And I think that for me, it's a lot about the cyber resilience, for example. So there is a big focus on the cyber resilience testing, and it becomes even more important as the organizations have been moving into cloud. or perhaps continue to move into cloud. It's a lot about the more technical elements like testing requirements, the internal, the external, the incident reporting. But I think what is important for me, it's not just the technical side, because I know we talk about the digital resilience, but it's also around the softer side. And the softer side is things like roles and responsibilities, where in an organization is going to be managed. What is the accountability of the senior management and the board level? What is the roles and responsibilities within the organization? Are the management really empowered to make this change instead of doing the tick box exercise? There is a second part, which is more around the supplier management and third-party management. So there is quite a lot about the concentration risks, the contracts with the third parties, the risk assessments, the strategy. And then I guess also there are certain things like how do you modify your control environment? So for example, do you increase the involvement of the board and the senior management? How do you link the critical business functions to the ICT risks? I guess where I will summarize on this question is to comply with the legislation. It's not just the technical part in terms of, being the digitally resilient and being resilient in terms of the incident testing, the testing, etc. But it's more on the, how effective is it going to be for your company longer term, so that it's not just a tick box exercise, as Mark mentioned, and a few others on this call, but it's more the strategic advantage of this change.
Excellent, thank you. So how do we make sure then that this minimizes the disruption to customers and other entities within financial services? Mark, do you have any views on that?
Well, I think the whole intention here, and it's not just DORA. If you look at what the UK PRA have recently done with their operational resilience efforts, it's all designed to improve the service to the customer, to reduce disruption of operational failures, and maybe cascading risks even beyond just being able to access their banking services. And I think here, kind of coming back to that tick box versus a strategic advantage. If you speak to the GSIBs, the globally significant financial organizations, the people who are owning the operational resilience there, they're already risk managers. So a lot of these financial institutions, their whole business is based upon sound risk management. And what that allows them to do is it allows them to take risks to make money. That's the business that they're in. So this is kind of well understood culturally in some parts of the organization. I think what they're talking about now is making sure that kind of approach from board level is being driven down. And there are plenty of people within technology. My background is in networking. I'm a risk manager. I build a network to enable all the applications and all the services within an organization. So I think the organizations that are looking at this as a strategic opportunity, so that we will be more resilient, we will attract more customers because we gain a reputation for offering the best service, and at the same time being able to go faster. I can innovate more quickly if I understand what my risks are. I can make changes quickly. I can continuously release new versions of my software, etc., etc. So I think that there's only benefit here if organizations approach this correctly.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Thank you very much. I found in my experience in the financial crime space that senior staff only really pay attention when something goes horribly wrong and people get fined, and then they think, oh, hang on a sec, I should probably do something about this. So how do we ensure that companies are able to take this seriously from the beginning, as opposed to just leaving it and thinking, oh, actually, it isn't going to be a huge problem until something actually goes wrong? How do we ingrain this into the culture? Because we've spoken about it not being a tick box exercise. We've also spoken about it having an operational impact. But is this something that the ICT teams and also compliance and legal should be pushing forward, or is this something that should come from the top, or who should be owning this within a business setting? Francesco, any views?
Okay, sorry.
Francesco?
Of course, building a cybersecurity culture inside the organization is the fundamental step in order to be compliant. And let me say that it's something that international standards have taught way before DORA and the regulation, due to the fact that inside every international standard that is related to cybersecurity, let me say information security in general, the communication inside the organization is the most important part, due to the fact that a system, a management system, doesn't exist if it's not properly communicated inside the organization. Therefore, it's of course sanctions and fees, and the fact that there's an authority that actually can disrupt our brand reputation and disrupt our business. It's something that companies generally take in consideration, of course. But building a cybersecurity culture in an organization, it's not just a matter of compliance. It's a matter of enhancing the cybersecurity posture of the organization, prioristically, let's say, and apart from the compliance reasoning. Of course, building a cybersecurity culture in organization right now, it's kind of mandatory, let me say, from a GDPR perspective, due to the Article 29 of GDPR, due to the fact that it's not possible, and after that I leave the floor to you, it's not possible to test the operational resilience of ICT system without taking in consideration the human factor. And if we take in consideration the human factor in the test of the operational resilience, well, we need to have a cybersecurity culture inside the organization that encompasses every regulation that applies to our organization and can be driven by international standards. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. Bill, sorry.
Well, we touched on a lot of the cultural aspects earlier, and Francesco just reinforced a lot of that. But obviously, it goes far wider, and it needs to be at all sorts of functions within an organisation. I'm normally based in the UK, but currently I'm talking to you from Dubai, and I'm just doing a tour. I've just come from Riyadh beforehand, where we're doing some fully immersive simulation exercises for senior management teams within both public and private sector organizations. Now, GDPR mandates a level of testing and assessing the proficiency of your systems and processes. DORA goes even further. DORA is actually quite specific about the testing requirements. And I would advocate any organization that's going to take this seriously, again, it comes down to culture, that you're going to go beyond the sorts of tabletop sort of desktop exercises, PowerPoint sort of processes and classroom exercises simply aren't going to cut the mustard here. At one end, on the technical side, you need true penetration testing and need to be kept on your mettle the whole time. But also at an organizational level, we run fully immersive simulation exercises which have sandboxed environments with artificial email systems, artificial social media systems, end-to-end systems that are actually going to test teams, and we put them through their paces. And this is required not only just under DORA to test the proficiency of financial services organizations, but as Mark said, there are other regulations coming through as well. And I'm working with globally with people who are leading this sort of initiative with ports. We saw how quickly the world ground to a halt when one container ship went sideways in the Suez Canal. When we talk about critical infrastructure, there's a lot more than just DORA and the financial sector that we can focus on here. And I don't know, certainly in the UK where I'm based, if ports like Felixstowe or Harwich were taken out, those supermarket shelves will be bare in 3 days. So we need to think very broadly. We need to have a cultural aspect, but we need to be testing in a truly immersive environment where people are actually put to their mettle and we actually learn from it and gain the sort of operational situational situational analysis and ability to respond. It's a bit like if you've got a driving test. Simply having the theory side of the driving test doesn't make you safe to go on the roads. You need to actually develop a level of road sense that's going to actually help you have the situational awareness of all the other motorists on the road, and you need to actually develop that and rehearse that in practice before you're going to be safe on the roads.
Of course. Mark?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on one point there as well about it being broader than financial services. Sure, when you're looking at critical national infrastructure and you look at all the things that have to work for a nation to function, it's way broader. But the DORA itself actually applies to critical service providers already, and actually speaking to some very large multinationals in different sectors, such as oil companies, because they have a financial arm. They may have futures trading, that kind of thing. This applies to them too. And if you look at the penalties associated with DORA, those penalties are generally calculated associated with, global gross revenue, a percentage of. So actually, I think that DORA has made a far more organizations than the banks, and certainly the 160 banks that the European Banking Authority regulate. It's all of finance, it's service providers, it's other large multinationals. And I have a feeling that that's going to propagate because best practices are going to be developed. Things around automation, automating, old, spreadsheet-based and PowerPoint-based exercises so that we can actually project what would happen in reality. I think those kind of capabilities and those practices are going to proliferate. Yeah, that's kind of what I hope anyway.
Excellent, thank you. Let's move on to some audience questions. I'm very glad I'm not answering these. They look very complicated. Alina, can I come to you on the first one? So how do you measure the effectiveness and efficiency of your digital operational resilience framework? Do you use metrics and benchmarks or feedback?
Yeah, so I think that there are different ways that you can measure it. Of course, you have certain expectations. So if you were to do an assessment or if you were to do the measurements, you would derive the certain criteria or metrics. But I think one of the angle which perhaps is not always explored, which I want to bring to their attention, is sometimes you could do 100% of DORA, but ultimately it's better to do 20% and be super effective rather than doing 100% and kind of spending a lot of effort on it. So I guess one of the key questions is sometimes you could spend, millions, if it's a large company, millions of dollars on being compliant on DORA. But how do you, instead of spending millions, how do you do this 80-20 rule so that you ultimately get the efficiencies that we discussed earlier on in the session about being strategic and making the change rather than doing every single exercise? So I think what is very important in terms of the DORA is the principle in terms of what matters, how critical it is versus doing everything possible, because doing everything possible is going to be likely to be too time consuming and quite hard to demonstrate before 17th of January. But also it's likely to be quite onerous and quite expensive, in particular if you wanted to hire the external support or the consulting or the contractors. So to answer the question, I guess, yes, it's important to think about the metrics and to think about them early in the process. It's important to think about both the metrics which are related to the regulatory guidelines in terms of meeting the expectations, the key principles, but also taking a step back and thinking, do you really need to do this? And can you be more efficient in terms of the operational efficiency, but also the monetary efficiencies of getting the best outcome?
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any other inputs on that question from the panel? Mark?
I'd say focus on critical business functions. So the UK PRA talk about important business services. If you financial organizations generally have the tier 0, tier 1 systems, systemically critical, institutionally critical. I think if you begin by focusing there, and and you look at how you map, how you conduct business impact analysis, how you conduct risk analysis, how you try to automate that and measure that. I think, to Alina's point, focus really where it matters, and then you can start to build excellence in that area, and then you can take those principles and those practices and you can spread them across your organization.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, thank you very much. Second question, so how do you ensure that your ICT systems are aligned with your business objectives and strategies? Do you use a SWOT analysis, a SMART framework, or a vision board? I only know of vision boards from Pinterest. I'm assuming that's not what's being referred to here. Does anyone want to come in on this? How do you ensure your systems are aligned with business objectives and strategies? I can't input on this, guys. This needs to be one of you guys.
I'm giving everyone a chance. No one's answering. I mean, I almost think that this isn't related to DORA. If your ICT systems are not really aligned with your business objectives and strategies, you've got a bigger problem. There's a business problem there somewhere. I do think that there's a question around how do you ensure that your controls are aligned with the principles and the requirements of DORA. I know a lot of organizations are working with the Big Four, and there's plenty of consulting going on here, and I'm sure people like Bill can help with that. I also think with that is thinking about your controls is how automated are they versus how manual and periodic are they. The world we're going into with digital operations is things change continuously. Software's being released continuously. Clouds are being modified continuously. If your risk assessment approach and your risk management approach is doing it once a year, I personally don't think that aligns with the principles of DORA either. I think that's an area, but I just answered a different question because I'm sorry.
Well, in terms of alignment, just to pick up on what Mark was saying, if your business objectives and strategies aren't aligned with your IT strategy, then you're already in trouble. I mean, almost every single sector and industry has faced a real challenge of late in terms of digital transformation. One of the disappointing things is that all too often we're seeing digital without the transformation. Where people actually are seeking to move to the cloud, seeking to do things digitally in exactly the same way as they were previously done manually or whatever. And we've seen this in government where a lot of processes have simply been put in the cloud, and you're filling in the same PDFs and forms, and they haven't rethought the way that we deliver services and do everything. The thing that's particular about the financial services sector, it is digital. It's all digital already. Almost every single financial sector organization you can talk about is actually a technology company. Everything is digital. And therefore, if we're talking here about a lack of alignment between business strategy and objectives and your IC systems, I think you're already in big trouble.
Great way to end on a positive, Bill. Thank you very much. Francesco, anything from you on that?
Yeah, of course. I'll keep with my topic that are international standards compliance today. International standard compliance, governance. I mean, in order to have an information security policy that is adequate and compliant with ISO 27001:2022, you have to align, as Bill and Mark just said, you have to be already aligned. It's not DORA that obliges you to be aligned. If you are a huge company in the financial sector, of course you have to be certified. Of course you have to have an information security management system. And in order to have an information security management system, you have to be aligned with objectives that are measurable, with KPIs, of course, and with your strategies. Because if you don't have an information security policy that is aligned to your strategy and to your business objective, well, it's not compliant to ISO 27001. And of course, it wouldn't be compliant to DORA or to GDPR. So it's let me say that it's a requirement that has to exist way before DORA.
So now, basically. or last week. Yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Bill, let me come on to you then. So how do you test the operational resilience of your ICT systems? Do you use simulated cyber attacks or real ones? You're on mute, Bill.
Done it again. There needs to be a level of penetration testing, as I said earlier, because you need to actually be on your mettle in terms of testing your actual systems and whatever. But you can't test critical infrastructure to the level of creating crises simply to put people to the test. And therefore, and again, I go back to the fact that the traditional tabletop PowerPoint class-based training exercises are simply out of date in this respect. And there is a higher standard to which organizations are being held. And effectively, whether you're talking about your privacy obligations or your DORA obligations, you are mandated to carry out the assessment and testing. And if you're going to skimp on it by doing less than truly rigorous testing, then even when things go wrong, your feet are going to be held to the fire. And what the experience we've seen under GDPR is the fact that those organizations that went the extra mile to have fully immersive simulations, the sort of things I run, have actually benefited in the long run, because when they had to face the music with the regulator wasn't saying, well, did this happen or didn't it? Because obviously the very fact that they're facing the regulator means that it did, and no organization is going to be 100% secure anyway. What is going to be asked is, what were the reasonable steps? What are the things that you did to act responsibly in advance? And if you went the whole hog in front running these tests and doing all of this, you will an enormous volume recap many times over that whatever you spent on that in terms of reduced fines and whatever. So, and we've seen that already with GDPR. What you're seeing under DORA is actually a far greater level of rigor expected in the testing that you're required, and potentially we won't see until it happens, potentially very large fines if you don't.
Alina, I guess, am I right in thinking that the operational testing needs to be part of the BAU that these teams do, as in that there shouldn't be a need to find the extra resourcing necessarily, that it should just be part of what the testing team actually does from an operational standpoint?
So I think it is what the team needs to do, but because there are the further regulatory guidelines, right, they need to be taken into consideration. So the scope of DORA is much broader than the normal BAU. And the scope first needs to be translated into requirements, and then those requirements need to be tested appropriately. So until you've done that, you don't necessarily know what is the impact on your teams. What I do see is that the organizations are currently budgeting for DORA for next year. They are waiting because there is a bit of a scope. The scope is not fully confirmed yet from the regulatory side, and that there may be certain changes which may come as the scope is fully confirmed, and that will impact how much, the testing, but everything else as well is done, and whether the budgets need to be increased or perhaps not.
Okay, thank you. Very briefly, Mark, because we've got 5 minutes left.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to this. We've talked a lot about adversarial kind of threats and adversarial testing. DORA and all of these operational resilience regulations are all equally apply to non-adversarial issues, operational failures, human error, that kind of thing. So I think there's an opportunity here. If you're using the tooling that's being required here in terms of mapping, in terms of understanding dependencies, in terms of being able to understand what your risk is, you can use those tools to do testing, to do simulation before changes are made. So it's a different sort of testing, and that will reduce the overall level of impact. Because if you see a lot of the disruptions we've seen across financial services have been operational error as opposed to cyber attacks. So I think that's the other thing that the organizations need to think about.
Interesting, thank you. Let's go to our final audience question. I would like to ask, once DORA comes into effect, aspect, who will be able to finance to meet these mandatory legal criteria and to ensure business resilience? Who wants to take that one? Bill?
I think with any of these type of things, it's within the organization, those responsible for putting together the CISO function, the compliance function, whatever, need to be able to put a business case to the board. And arguably, given the alternatives here, you not only need to be putting together a business case that includes all of the aspects of DORA as a given, but also you need to be thinking about this, even if you're not one of the small number of banks that Mark identified, if you're anywhere within the supply chain, because I think we need to remember the extent to which this regulation applies to non-traditional financial organizations, also to the supply chain supporting these financial organizations. And therefore, all of these organizations need to be thinking now about having that business case in place so that they're ready to go. I would suspect if the business case hasn't already been proven, that you're a little bit behind the game.
Thank you. Francesco?
Let me say that finance to meet this mandatory legal criteria would mean just financing all the operation that actually a large firm, a large company has to carry out without DORA. DORA, it's a way to control and even to standardize the ICT compliance. It's a way to focus on supply chain because it's one of the most important topics, the supply chain incident and supply chain compliance. But still, as Alina said, companies are trying to budget for DORA compliance right now, and DORA compliance will be in the same budget of international standards, GDPR, ICT compliance in general. So there are no obligation that I don't think that there are obligations that are so new in the cybersecurity field that are not even considered till now from the perspective of large companies in the finance sector. So it's a cultural change, of course. It's not a cybersecurity change. It's a legal change. It's a legal revolution, I'd say, but it's not a cybersecurity revolution. We have to be fully aware that what we thought that a company has to implement because it's a best practice right now, it's a mandatory obligation, but it's always the same best practice that we need to follow.
Of course. Thank you very much. So we've got 2 minutes. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds each to summarize the main takeaway that you would like the audience to have on this. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Alina, can I come to you first?
Yes, so I think from my side, DORA has a lot of overlap with a number of other regulations, for example, the EBA guidelines, NIS, and a few others. So there are certain places where it goes further. So, for example, the minimum requirements for the contracts, and these are the things which need to be considered. But as we discussed, it's very important to focus on what really matters on the critical services versus everything to make sure that it is successful.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I just think organizations should think of the strategic benefit of changing the way they look at risk management from the way they deliver their IT services. There are lots of regulations and obviously much of this isn't new, but there is an emphasis here on being proactive, on continuously assessing risk and using tools to help you do that. Because if you do that, then you can innovate faster. You can take more risk in terms of, delivering services, and I think that's really the way to look at it.
Thank you, Francesco.
Yeah, I'd say that we need to have this view, the view of integrated compliance. So we need to carry out activities of compliance, of ICT compliance that are interconnected, that are linked one to another, in order to follow a compliance path that not only relates to DORA, but even to international standards, GDPR and IS2, and so on and so forth. We will see in the future that the European legislator and even national legislator, because in Italy we have another cybersecurity law, which is called the cybersecurity perimeter, that actually affects even the financial sector. We need to look at ICT compliance as a whole, and of course, to follow an integrated compliance path.
Thank you. And finally, Bill.
Well, I may be preaching to a welcome audience here, given that this is risk digital, but I would argue that this all fundamentally comes back to risk. And if you don't have the right culture in place that addresses all aspects of risk, from privacy to operational risk to cybersecurity and everything like that, if you don't have the business case and the supportive board level initiative behind this, and if you don't actually have the wise sort of nous to grasp this as an opportunity for digital transformation and strategic advantage, then I think you're missing a trick. But hopefully the people tuning in here will be people who are risk aware and to whom all of this will make sense.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I'd like to take this as an opportunity to thank everyone on the panel and the audience for all of your questions too. We'll now be having a break, but please come back shortly for the next section, which is the last session of the day, which is the complex web of financial crime in 2023. See you shortly.